Welcome back to the Cybersecurity Mentors Podcast. On this episode, we're speaking with Evan Reiser, the CEO and founder of Abnormal AI. And Evan and I got to know each other when I was on his podcast, the Enterprise AI Defenders Podcast, and I had an awesome time. It was actually my first podcast ever.
Really?
And Evan invited me on, and he said I did a decent job. He's like, you've only done this one time before? But it helped inspire and us to aspire to building a podcast. I was like, hey, maybe we can do this thing. So thanks, Evan, for coming on. We got a lot of cool things to talk about and appreciate you taking the time.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me, and great to see you, John, and excited to talk with you and Steve.
Absolutely.
Thank you. Well, let's just get started with just a brief intro and, just kind of tell us a little bit about yourself, how you got started, how you ended up where you are now, and we can go from there.
Yeah, sounds good. I think I'll try to give the short version since the long version is not super interesting. But I've always been a computer nerd and a kind of entrepreneur of sorts. Abnormal is my fourth startup, so I've been building companies and businesses and my products for the last, forever. My background is actually not in cybersecurity. So in some ways I'm a horrible guest for your show, but there's probably other people that kind of are just getting started. So hopefully I can share some of my experience. I spent most of my career doing behavioral ad targeting. So all the annoying ads that follow you around the internet and steal your data to personalize ads and websites.
Yeah.
Probably my fault. So I apologize. Now I'm the founder and CEO of Abnormal AI. We're trying to, stop some crime and, do things a little more worthy, getting people to click on ads. So, like I said, I've been an entrepreneur for a while. I've started, Abnormal was my fourth company. Last company was bought by Twitter, where I ran the kind of ads targeting and kind of applied machine learning teams. So that's been kind of most of my background in machine learning and AI. And, about 8 years ago, started Abnormal. The idea was to take some of the same technologies to understand people and behavior and context and use that to stop the next generation of cyber attacks. So we're about a 1,000-person company today. About 1 out of 4 Fortune 500 companies are Abnormal customers. I think we're the fastest growing private cybersecurity company. And, as I've gotten more into this, met great people like you, Joe, I just feel more passionate about trying to fight the good fight and also helping you go inspire the next generation of cybersecurity defenders.
Absolutely. Very cool. The one startup company that stood out was Gamer Nook. So how did that come about? That sounded cool. Sounded like you learned a lot from that experience. So what was that company?
Well, calling it a company was probably a bit of an overstatement, but it was my first kind of business, or not my first tech business I started. I've always been a gamer, right? Actually, I got into computers because I love video games. I went to school for computer engineering because I thought it was about building computers, which was a hobby and small business I had in high school. It turned out computer engineering is really electrical engineering with extra calculus. So
a lot of math.
And I even got into software engineering because I wanted to build, I built games and kind of tools to track scores on games. After I kind of graduated, I had a normal, boring job, and it lasted about 18 months. I was like, I can go start my own company. And the thing I was really passionate about was gaming, and so we tried to create the MySpace of gaming. It was actually a very popular product, a very popular website. We had probably over 100,000 users in the first year. But the problem was, it was just me and my buddy kind of building everything. We built the entire web application, the database to go run this. The problem was we had so many users and kind of ads were very immature right in the early 2000s that we couldn't actually support the server costs. We had 2 servers and that was cost more than our all of our ad revenue. So we ended up kind of shutting it down despite being a popular product because it was a horrible business. We made no money. But it was a lot of fun. That's kind of how I got into, building, how I kind of got into ad targeting actually is we built a lot of custom software to try to find relevant ads, to just increase the value of kind of getting people to our website. This is before kind of real-time bidding and kind of more modern day ad technology, but that was kind of the first thing that got me from, just general software engineering and kind of application development into kind of ads and, behavioral targeting.
Were there any lessons that you learned in kind of your early startups and just that going through that experience?
Oh yeah, I've if you look at my resume, it's basically a history of kind of what not to do in entrepreneurship. I mean, from this first company, the biggest, I actually really had a lot of fun, although, we spent so much money on these servers. I was dead broke and sleeping on my friend's couch. So I think like the first big lesson from that company was, a great product is not a great business, right? And you have to kind of understand what the business model is. And you can have an awesome product that your customers love, but if you can't make enough money to pay your bills, right, it's not a great business. And I kind of I think deceived myself a little bit. Everyone said, oh, as long as your website stats are up and to the right, we had, all the exponential growth curves. It's like we must be doing something right. We never kind of thought like, well, where does this end up and how does this work? So I think that was a big lesson for me. I started another company after that, which is basically luxury Groupon. That was a business. We raised probably $50 million of venture capital money. We had millions of subscribers, but it kind of did make money, but it turned out like the long-term unit economics were not super profitable. It became increasingly profitable or increasingly costly to acquire new users, and then decreasingly profitable to kind of monetize those users through daily deals. So I think that was a big lesson on just like unit economics. And I think the other big lessons along the way were just making sure you're in a market that is big. You can have an awesome product that is profitable, but if you only have 20 customers that really care, it can only get so big and you can only have so much impact in the world. And I think that the biggest lesson for me kind of, I think post the Twitter acquisition, was just learning how to work as a team. I'd always been kind of like the one-man show. I was the programmer and the accountant and the marketer and the website optimizer and like the, security team, the IT team. And I kind of like prided myself on kind of doing everything myself. And I think honestly, there's a little bit of ego there. I think just trying to prove I could do it myself. So I think just like realizing that I'm not the smartest person in the room and that if you want to do something impressive, you got to really work as a team. I think, I didn't like working at Twitter for many reasons, but I did have a lot of professional growth there, learning to work with teams of 10 people and 100 people and 400 people. So that was kind of a big just wake up call for me as a professional. And I've learned a lot, since starting Abnormal, but those are some early lessons in entrepreneurship that, it took me 10 years to learn. I hope maybe some listeners can learn those in 10 months instead.
Awesome. Thank you.
Yeah. So I think that leads us up to email security and AI, right? Like where did you talked about kind of the behavioral, were dabbling in behavioral a little bit with the ad marketing, but how did let's throw AI and email security together, which sounds cool now, but back then, right, it wasn't necessarily like, how's this going to work? So how did this come to mind?
Yeah, so Abnormal Security is like a behavioral security platform. We're most known for email security, so kind of most of our customers buy from us. When we started the company, actually, we didn't realize we would become an email security company. The idea was to take some of the same behavioral modeling, kind of contextual analysis, and decision-making technology we built at Twitter and kind of past companies. And the idea was that if you could apply those technologies to kind of enterprise users rather than consumers, there was more standardized ways to get data. You could build more robust behavioral models, and you could kind of do good stuff. So we started the company, it was really more of a technology vision than a product vision, which I don't recommend, right? It's good to start with a very clear use case. But the one smart thing we did is before we actually wrote any code, we went to go talk to over 100 CIOs and CISOs of big and small companies, and we said, here's some trends with AI, right? We think they're going to be more powerful, more cheaper, data will be more standardized. Here's things you can do. Here's a platform we're trying to build, and here's the type of capabilities that are possible, right? Making kind of behavioral and contextual decisions. What are some use cases that you think we can apply this to? And the very specific question we asked, I think was effective. We talked to both CIOs and CISOs, and we said, what's a problem that if we could come back to the end of the year and solve really well for you by your own definition, what would you pay us $250,000 a year to go do? And that's a very qualifying question because no one's gonna pay $250,000 for a problem that doesn't really matter, right? It's gotta be really high pain, high priority. And when we kind of, talk to these customers, probably 20% were outside of security, but 80% of the use case were inside security. And it was, fraud and social engineering and phishing and identity security and things, maybe DLP. And the most common thing we heard was around email security. And we said, well, that's weird. There's a lot of email security companies. Like, why is that a problem? Why do you care about that? And what we learned from customers, and I knew nothing about cybersecurity, right? I would on my first call, someone talked about a sock, and in the background, I was Googling cybersecurity socks, right? Like things you wear on your feet. Right. I was such an idiot, right? But I did learn a lot along the way. But we kind of asked customers, well, why is that? Why, you buy, all these other security gateway companies, they claim they sell to everyone. Why are these problems? And the trend that we kind of uncovered, which was probably obvious to you guys, but I think not to a lot of entrepreneurs, was that kind of email attacks had shifted from these kind of spray and pray campaign type attacks, which could be very easily stopped with threat intelligence or kind of heuristics and rules. And it's a shift to these more kind of personalized attacks, specifically social engineering and business email compromise. And a lot of things you would look for in kind of a conventional email attack, right? A bad URL, a bad IP address, maybe some keywords in the text, links, attachments. They didn't exist in kind of a social engineering attack. And so it was like a unique email address, a unique message, every time. And so conventional technology that focused on threat intelligence and heuristics, they weren't effective at stopping that. And so we had this idea, which was, imagine like every other competitor in the world, they had perfect threat intelligence. That means every attack has ever been seen for could be stopped. How do you stop the things that don't get through, right? Or how do you stop the things that have not been seen before? And so we kind of took this kind of idea of behavioral modeling and we said, okay, we don't have a lot of data on the never before seen attacks by definition. So we can't build a machine learning model to predict that. We do have a ton of data on normal behavior. But if we integrate into Microsoft and Google and Salesforce and Workday, we have tons of data about what normal patterns of behavior are. And so rather than try to model for unknown stuff, let's model for what known good looks like. And then when we see things that don't look known good, right, we'll do some risk assessment and we'll kind of assume it's bad. And so that was kind of our unique approach, and that kind of pulled us into email security. And we focused primarily on email security for the first couple years. And since then, we've kind of branched out to other security applications that are still focused on trying to find abnormal patterns of behavior.
Yeah, makes sense. I've been living it. We've lived and breathed it, right? Right, Steve?
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Yeah, we've had the why can this not stop these emails from getting through, right?
I'll share a quick anecdote, right? Because I knew nothing about cybersecurity. So many people ask me, well, how did you build this product that works, right? If you don't know anything about cybersecurity. And my secret strategy was to not be scared to ask dumb questions. And so I would talk to all these customers and I would just say, hey, what's the last email attack that got through? I would say, how did you stop? How did you find it?
Yeah.
Right. And people would just tell you the answers. Or oh, well, if you just do a DNS lookup on this thing, you look at the technical contact field, that email address, right? That email address, the technical contact, that's the real attacker's email address. So if you look at that signal, right, you can find all these other similar ones. So people just tell us, all the secret answers. And so you kind of train your AI, hey, look at this thing. And, John said this third thing and Steve said this fourth thing. And eventually you just keep asking people, well, how did it get through? And how did you find it as a person? Then obviously you can get AI to replicate some of those human, investigations, but do it in real time. So just I think one thing that really worked well for us early on is just don't be afraid to ask the dumb questions, right? And sometimes there's a lot of wisdom you can pull out of seemingly simple answers.
Yeah, well, I think that's a good lesson for anybody. It's hey, just be humble, right? Don't assume that you have all the answers and you don't need to ask those questions because you might discover gold from just asking the simple questions.
Yeah,
sure.
And I promise you probably most of your listeners know a lot more about security than I did when I started, right? So I think if they kind of bring that humility and that curiosity, a little critical thinking, right, they'll have huge impact in the world.
Absolutely.
So when Abnormal was founded, first of all, how did you come up with the name? I like it. And two, how big was the team? Was it just you and someone else or what did that look like?
Yeah. So when we started the company, we had 7 people were kind of the founding team. We did grow very quickly. But it was kind of 7 of us and none of us had ever worked in cybersecurity or even I think on a cybersecurity project. It was, I was probably the dumbest of the 7 people. The other folks were all applied machine learning experts that I actually worked together in the past with, kind of building similar technology for different applications. And there's the name behind Abnormal is kind of funny. When we started the company, we're we should pick something that's a very responsible, reasonable name. And it was very boring. It was I don't know, Granite Security. So it sounded very stable. And we didn't know exactly what we were going to do, but we knew it was going to be an AI company. And so our logo was this brain with a circle around it, right? Which is obviously what you do as an AI company. And we showed this to one of our mentors. He's like, ooh, I hate the name. That sounds so boring. He's like, but I like that logo. It kind of reminds me of this old movie called Young Frankenstein, where, there was this brain in a bottle called Abby Normal. He's like, you should call yourself Abnormal because that's kind of what you do. You're looking for abnormal patterns of behavior. So that kind of I heard that and I was like, Well, one, it's kind of silly because you can call things, you can create like the abnormal business plan, your abnormal executive team, but it also describes what we do. So we originally called the company Abnormal AI, and that was our name in 2018. And we would go into meetings with, CISOs, and we talk about AI back in 2018, 2019. And we literally got laughed out of the room several times. I had CISOs hang up on me and be like, hey, you guys seem like you're reading too much sci-fi. You sound like you're building Skynet. This AI thing is kind of a joke. Like, I'm like, good luck, but I don't, call me when you have 20 customers first. So we actually changed the name probably in the first 6 months from Abnormal AI to Abnormal Security. And we didn't talk about AI or machine learning at all because this is obviously before ChatGPT and it meant a different thing. We actually recently renamed the company or reverted the name back to the original name, Abnormal AI. So that's kind of the history of that story. It's a little bit silly.
So you talked about 2018, and you guys were ahead of the game. Now, I didn't go to RSA, but all I heard were people that came back from RSA, and AI is everywhere, right? And everything. And we all know, we hear it's the buzzword.
For sure.
But there's some truth to it, obviously. But what do you see kind of the evolution? I think one of the things you told me that really was intriguing is how you guys are just, automating a lot of things, but, taking advantage of the technology as much as possible, right? To utilize it, not to be afraid of it necessarily, but also eating your own dog food, right? Like whatever you are giving to customers, you are also utilizing yourself in different ways. But if you had your crystal ball a little bit, right? Luckily you guys were ahead of the game. But what do you think this looks like in the next 2-3 years?
Yeah, I would say I'm probably more on the like AI acceleration side, where I think just like the future is going to get way crazier, way faster than we think. And probably the three of us, we have a slightly unique view where we can see some of this in action, right? So I think AI is going to change, lots of stuff, right? It's probably a less contrarian view these days. I think from a cybersecurity perspective, it surely changes the threat landscape, right? We're going to have more criminals. There's people today that they don't know how to be a cyber criminal. They love to be, but they're not technical enough. Right now, with things like ChatGPT, you don't have to write. You have to speak English to send a phishing email, right? You don't have to know how accounts payable work to do fraud. So we're gonna have more criminals. Suddenly, the criminals are gonna have more scalability in their attacks, right? What used to take an hour to send that attack, now it takes 10 seconds. And I think the most scary part is that even just the average large language model, it's capable of inventing attack ideas or social engineering ideas that are way beyond what like smart, offensive research can even dream up of. So I think the threat landscape is going to change. Obviously, the tools needed for defense are going to change, right? If the attacks, because the attacks will also happen faster, right? If they're less human powered and more automated, whether through AI or good scripting, the attacks happen faster. So if you look at the paradigm for cybersecurity today, a lot of it's based on the idea that we kind of monitor lots of stuff. We suck up all the data. We guess what the new attacks are. We pop up an alert. Some smart human looks at that and makes a decision. Well, in the future, if the attacks are automated, you can have the world's best FBI investigator. That alert pops up. By the time they read the thing, the attack's done, right? Mm-hmm. So we're going to have more automation, right, on the defense side. So I just think the nature of security architecture will also have to change. And also, I think then maybe the third kind of big trend is that AI is obviously going to change the IT architecture. And historically, security architecture has always followed IT architecture. And so, what happens when you have, all these AI agents running around, right? How do your AI agents do 2FA, right? If the agents are, if humans are accessing things at like 1 request per second, what happens? The AI does it 1,000 requests per second, right? Yeah. How do you know like what's appropriate for your HR agent to do, right? There's some kind of contextual consideration you have to do to all these kind of requests that may not be possible with kind of our current authorization models, right? Yeah. So like the nature of like how businesses and people use technology are totally changing. That requires kind of an overhaul of IT architecture. Security architecture will have to follow, and I think that we're kind of in a paradigm for cybersecurity as an industry that is was built more for the past and the future. And I think there's an opportunity for the three of us and hopefully a lot of our listeners to go help us upgrade quickly into whatever the new generation of defense is.
Yeah. One of the things that I've been asked this kind of question generally about the threat of AI, and I'm like, well, yeah, we're already using AI. We've been using AI, and it is a little bit of, hopefully our AI is better than the bad guy's AI, right? It's AI versus AI already,
For sure.
So yeah, it will continue to be an arms race. But I do think it is a force multiplier with the automation. It can be a force multiplier for bad or for good, but it is a force multiplier. So you need to be aware of that, for sure. But it's going to be interesting. Stay tuned, right? Buckle up.
Exciting and scary times. Yeah.
Yeah, for
Yeah,
sure.
absolutely. Even now, I mean, just with ChatGPT, what it can do for you, how it can help you. I mean, I'll be honest. I use it every day, multiple times every day, to just help me. Right. I mean, we've had a couple episodes where John has pulled up his screen and he's been asking AI to write him a script to do X, Y, Z, and it's like seconds. Boom, you have something ready to go. So it is, and for someone like myself, I think about all the good things it could do, but I also think about all the bad things it can do, kind of like what you just said, like what you were just talking about, Evan. And it's kind of it makes me a little paranoid, just paranoia, and just like, man, this is just this is something just waiting to just explode and just revolutionize what we know today, especially in cyber. So yeah, just
Yeah, I mean, AI is an extremely powerful technology, right? All technology are tools, right? Tools can be used for good or evil. Um, if you look at like nuclear energy, same thing, right? Nuclear energy creates some of the best things in the world and the worst things in the world. The difference thing with AI is it's a little bit less controllable, right? Anyone can just go
Yeah.
download some open source model on their laptop, and God knows that thing can do. So I think that there is a bit of asymmetry, I think, between the attackers and defenders. The advantage the attackers have, right, is they're very quick to adopt new technologies, right? Because like, for all three of us, we have to like protect the enterprise. We have to make sure we make no mistakes. They can make
Right.
1,000 mistakes rolling something out. So they're going to always adopt new technologies faster. I think the advantage that the defenders will have in the long run is that we're going to have the data advantage and the context advantage. And so there's some things that are not knowable right outside the enterprise that are knowable inside, right? I can have my personal AI listening to everything I do, everything I say, really understanding my personality, my behavior. And so, if I say, hi, Mr. John, right? We know, or some AI avatar says, hi, Mr. John, we'll know for sure that that's not how, Evan and
Right.
John talk to each other. We've known each other for a while. So I think there will be a asymmetric data advantage, but we have to kind of adopt and evolve our, defensive tools, take advantage of those data assets inside the company to, and we have to move quickly, right, to make sure that the attackers don't win with their kind of, time advantage or their first mover advantage.
Yeah. Very cool.
absolutely. So we were talking about abnormal and kind of how you guys have now. There was a point in time where you kind of just shifted to email security, but that wasn't kind of the plan. What are some of the other things that you guys are branching out to and doing now that are not so much email security, or maybe some things that you have coming up for the future?
Yeah, so there's some obvious things, right? Kind of adjacent to email security. We're doing kind of generative phishing training where we kind of, almost take our behavioral profile, we invert it to create like a red team profile. We look at the real attacks, then we kind of send a training example that is personalized for the user. If they fail, we then give them kind of personalized coaching. So it's not just like a script that sends emails, right? It actually understands the person, their role, their job, give them kind of personalized advice in like a very friendly way. So there's some adjacencies like that we've launched. There's some things that kind of are a little bit further outside of email security, but are still around kind of like behavioral security. We have a identity threat detection and response product where we look at the behavior of how people use enterprise applications like Microsoft 365. And we say, hey, like, Steve is authenticated, but like is working a lot different than how Steve normally works, right? That's not a weird web browser, right? Why is Steve using a PowerShell script to access something he has access to through Okta? That just doesn't look like Steve. We're going to kick him out, right? So we're kind of monitoring the behavior, how people use applications, and then, blocking access, terminating sessions, things like that. That's kind of like what we do today. I think the future for us is trying to think more about how we build solutions for the future, right? I think that cybersecurity is very focused on protecting infrastructure, right? We're trying to focus on how do you protect people? And the industry is very focused on using kind of threat intelligence and kind of known heuristics or known patterns to stop the next attack. We're trying to be very focused on being kind of experts of identity, context, and behavior to look for try to stop the new attacks. In terms of kind of like what products will launch in the future, I'm not totally sure, but I think like a a big trend is obviously, AI and the kind of enterprise adoption of these AI agents. My belief is that I don't think we want to secure AI agents the same way we secure other infrastructure. I think you got to treat it like you're securing people, right? It's going to, these AI agents will work and behave like people, and they're going to have similar access patterns, right? And ways of working that are more similar to people than, some new enterprise application you're rolling out. So I think that that's the opportunity for us. It's expanding beyond protecting people to protecting identities, whether they're, people or they're, service principals or they're, AI agents. I think that there's some unified platform that'll be important to kind of use behavior and context to kind of look for abnormal patterns and stop them. And then there's maybe like a little bit further out, but that might get a little bit science fiction-y. So I'll pause there unless you guys want me to double click.
No, that's great. That's great.
Yeah.
I mean, that just gives our listeners an idea of kind of not just where you guys are going, but where others could go as well. And then just the idea about just behavioral security, it's just, I mean, it's a game changer, right? Because the example that you just gave about me, like, hey, Steve is doing this, Steve is doing that. Why is he accessing this through a PowerShell script when he has access to the tool? Like, all of that plays a huge part in just what everyday people do, right? I mean, when you have someone who's working in finance and someone who maybe working as a janitor, right? They still have some level of access to the organization, to systems, whatever. But if you can tie it to their roles and what they usually do, kind of a baseline, I mean, that's next level already. So
yeah, and it feels like intuitive. And actually, this is what human analysts do today. Right. And so, I mean, the reason I'm very optimistic about, not just for Admiral, for us as an industry, is if you look at kind of any of these big breaches, right, the big public ones, I won't name the names, but what is actually positive is that they happen. And then some humans go through a bunch of logs and data sets. At some point, they're like, oh, this is what happened. In hindsight, actually, we probably could have seen that coming. Right. Well, if that takes a human 8 weeks to figure out, at some point in the future, an AI can do it in 8 milliseconds. Right. And so I think we have the data. Right. And I'm sure you guys have seen this in your own experience, right? You're just looking at, you have even a junior analyst looking at some logs. You're like, that's weird. Mm-hmm. Why? Like, this doesn't look right. Right. Yep. I would say like 8 out of 10 of these breaches, right? You look at the activity, what happened, right? Even what you already have logged. And any human look is like, this just doesn't seem right. There's no way John is using the Yandex web browser from Eastern Europe to, send an invoice to someone, he's never talked to. Like, it just doesn't make any sense. So I think we all have this like human intuition, or sorry, I'll call it common sense intuition about what seems weird. And I think if you can kind of codify that and kind of train AI to apply that same judgment, right, it can apply, human-like accuracy, probably a lot higher, but in kind of, at machine speeds. So I think that concept seems like it should apply to many use cases that we apply today. I think for all of us working in security, right, just what percentage of our time is doing things that machines are probably better at? Like, we look at a lot of logs, a lot of files, a lot of alerts, right? I don't know if it's 1% or 99%, but a lot of that can probably be done better, right, with, current or future AI technologies. So I think the other benefit of, the AI transformation of security is that it's going to do more of the mundane work. And I think all of us will be able to spend more time doing higher leverage strategic, things as part of our day jobs.
So I was going to ask, because we do a mentorship for people kind of starting in cybersecurity. And sometimes I do get asked, well, I want to get into the field now before AI takes over all the security jobs. So do you see that happening at any point in time?
So like AI taking over all the jobs? I mean, on what time horizon probably, right? I mean, I think if you look at all the jobs that existed 1,000 years ago, they're probably way different than today. So there's always be some evolution, right? Technology will always help us do more things better. I think in the short term, right, there's some stuff that's not worth having AI go do, right? There is a lot of things that will be required, right, by humans, right? You got to build trust and make some judgments, right? Like, I don't think anyone's CEO wants to call the AI agent and look that agent, hey, can you promise this new thing is secure? Can you help us think about what our security strategies to unlock this new business opportunity? There's always going to be a role for people. I think my advice would be. One is everyone should really be leaning into these technologies. AI is, I'll just use ChatGPT as an example. It's like probably one of the first technologies where it will teach you how to use it, right? Yeah. If you say, hey, here's my job, here's what I want to learn, talk to me like a personal coach, and every day give me a little advice to kind of encourage me to do stuff, it will kind of train you and coach you probably better than anyone else. I like send like screenshots of my calendar, ChatGPT, and say, hey, how can I save an hour this week using, ChatGPT? And it gives you great examples. So I think everyone should be kind of like learning these tools, right? If your work doesn't allow it, then do it at home, right? But like, this is the future. And the other thing is that I think most knowledge workers, for sure, everyone's going to effectively become a manager, right? A manager of a bunch of AI agents. So I think the project management, the coordination, the prioritization, the operational management skills, those are things that were probably less valuable in kind of IC roles in the past. We become more valuable, right? As everyone has their own kind of team of AI interns helping them do their job. So I think that if you're trying to prepare and get ready for that AI future in cybersecurity, those are at least two things, good to get started. And just, getting familiar with like the common tools that are, AI forward and AI centric, whether it's, I don't know, Gemini or ChatGPT or Abnormal or whatever ServiceNow has, right? Like just like getting to see like how these things are applied will kind of open your mind about ideas for new applications. And I think very soon, right, in the next couple of years, it'd be very easy for even a non-technical person to kind of build their own little, AI application to help them with whatever their job is at work. So I think we're all going to become, managers and like, somewhat like not quite software engineers, but we'll be able to kind of, all of us will be able to kind of take technology and deploy that to solve, the current things we're facing. So those would be kind of 3 areas I would focus on if I was just graduating school, trying to get out of, get into cybersecurity and want to make sure I'm prepared for the AI world.
Yeah. And one thing I've thought about, I think those are really good points, because a lot of the grunt work that we do or have done, and we still do with all the logs, and you're still verifying. You're still trust but verifying. Like, hey, okay, the tool said this. It alerted this way. Let's go check it out. Was there a false positive? Did it miss something? Right. So you're still validating a lot of what the tool might be doing just to make sure that you feel confident in it. And there's probably a confidence level in all these tools. Okay, this tool, man, its false positive rate is minimal. Or this one, you got to go double, maybe 50-50, right? But those are going to get better. You're going to have better efficacy there. It's funny because I like being able to validate and still not lose the skills, right? So one thing I worry about is we're going to get to where like, hey, that my AI interns have got this, right? And then you lose the ability to go do that work, because you don't need to do it anymore, right? But I love being able to still jump back in and, hey,
Sure.
let's go figure out what happened. Let's go dig into it. And it really is true to what you said earlier, is like, I have this like, what's normal? This is weird. What's normal? And you kind of build that over years to your whole enterprise, and knowing even if it's weird, it's normal weird, right? But definitely AI and these tools can help you do that much faster. If you give it a ton of logs, you say, hey, look at all these logs and help me find the weird faster, then you might still do some validation there. But still, it can do that way better than you can. You just got to utilize those tools effectively, and don't be scared of them, and don't be scared they're going to necessarily take your job. But it's going to change. It's going to evolve. Be ready to evolve with them. And start now, right? Go ahead and start now, like you said.
That's right. I think like everyone in every job, you kind of need to understand how things work, like 1 or 2 layers of abstraction below your day work. I think if you think like the best managers in the world, the best managers are always able to go like a couple clicks down, right? The best software engineering managers, they understand how to like build software, right? The best CFOs, they're still can get into the spreadsheets and kind of like check your math. So I think like it's gonna be important for us to maintain those skills. I think you don't have to go all the way as far down as you used to, right? Like, you just really understand like memory allocation these days, super important for the 90%, probably not, right?
Yeah.
But it is good to kind of think about like what skills become more and less valuable right in the age of AI, right? If we were hiring a security analyst 5 years ago, right, we have a much more bias towards certainly technical experience, knowledge, maybe even intelligence, right? We would be biased for this. Today, like, it's actually changing a lot, right? I think that the skills that are more valuable in the future are things that are kind of like easier to learn and practice. I think it's things like curiosity, right? Asking really good questions, first principles thinking, critical thinking, the ability to kind of like iterate and kind of riff and jam. those are like when you're using these AI tools, those are really important, right? I've seen at least at our company, some of the most productive people are people who are like really good at asking questions, and they apply that into, their chat GPT, kind of sessions. So, I think the exciting thing for people today is like this, the skills are, what's the word? Like it's now easier to kind of get into it, but some of those kind of those core skills, these innate skills, they matter a lot more. They're more accessible, right? I think people that have high agency and high curiosity, they're going to outperform the people in the future that have like 10 years of career experience. So I think that's, I think it's exciting, right? If I was just trying to get into the workforce today, just focus on like the core things, curiosity, accountability, responsibility, communication, those things all of us can like, develop and learn, right? You don't need 10 years of, sim experience anymore to like still be effective.
Yeah, I like that. And I like that. I mean, think about when YouTube came out, right? And you're like, oh, now YouTube University, I can watch videos on everything. I mean, that was not around when I got into cybersecurity. It was like not a thing.
Yeah.
You couldn't even Google the things. There was Google, but you couldn't find everything you wanted to know how to do in cybersecurity. But now you have this, like you said, a coach, a mentor, a trainer that you can, all the things that you don't know, you can really get it simplified to your level. Just take advantage of these, right? Take advantage of this awesome time to be able to learn faster based off of your pace and where you are, that it is like the next level of being able to, you don't really have excuse. I guess what I'm saying is you don't have an excuse to not learn and to level up other than just time and energy, right? You just got to be, take that time, take the energy to invest in yourself.
Yeah. And like even developing the skill to like, even developing your own growth mindset and your own drive, like that's going to be that's also a valuable skill by itself. We have, probably 50 security analysts at our company, right? Like what we look for, we don't really look for technical skills, right? We look for people that have, again, curiosity, agency, they want to learn, right? They're showing up with a positive mindset. They're trying to like learn from their peers. Those things are become more and more valuable over time. And, similar to what you said, John, I would encourage everyone, go get a free, sign up for ChatGPT for free, create a custom GPT, give it custom instructions, say, hey, you are my personal cybersecurity coach. Every day I want you to help me get 1% better. I want you to provoke me and educate me and challenge me, but also kind of keep me in my own learning, right?
Yeah.
And talk to that thing every day. Don't treat it like a Google search engine, right? But treat it like a virtual assistant, right? That's trying to guide you and coach you. I'm sure if we all did that for our jobs, we'd probably be, we'd probably outperform whatever our default path is.
Yeah, I need to go make a CISO one right now.
I know. I need to go make one too. No, that's great advice. And I really liked what you said about kind of where the future roles are, about project management, just management overall, because that makes total sense. And I hadn't really thought about it until you just brought it up. Those are skills now that you can start working on that will help you in the future, because AI is moving and it's moving very quickly. So I like that a lot. So for our listeners, make sure you jot that down. That's a little golden nugget for this episode.
Yeah, because it's we're probably already there, but if not, like it'll happen in a year or two. Like, you're going to show up at work, you're going to have like 10 AI agents that will basically do whatever you want, and probably better than you can do. What are they going to do? Right? So how do you kind of like understand the higher altitude problem? How do you kind of assign the work? How do you kind of give feedback about, what's working? How do you inspect to make sure agent did it the right way? Right, kind of like what you said, John, like the trust and verify. Like those are skills that like you kind of wouldn't normally get until you started getting to like supervision and management. But kind of building those early on, right? If you can do that, even before your first job, you are going to be running circles around some of the older employees, right? If you get those skills right and you're up to date with these AI tools.
That's a cool point. I haven't really thought about it that way. Yeah. One question we'd like to ask everybody is just, if you mentioned a mentor you had, but just mentor any mentors you've had or had the ability to mentor others, just because the theme of mentorship, right? Is anybody, how has that played out with you and your career and your life? Have you had mentors along the way? Have you been able to mentor anything around that topic?
Yeah, I would say, the short answer is yes. I've had, a ton of different mentors. I do think kind of like there's this archetypal concept of like that one mentor that's like always around, calls you on the weekends. Like, I don't know, like that rarely exists, right? So I think my
Right.
model of mentorship is like, just kind of have this mindset, like you can learn stuff from anyone, right? Whether they're the CISO or the CEO or the janitor, like people know stuff that you can learn, right? You got to like,
Yeah.
engage and ask questions. I also think you got to like, there's no perfect mentor, right?
Right.
Everyone's got a bag of strengths and weaknesses, right? So I think when I think about my mentors, I have, there's probably, I don't know, 50 people I would consider like gives me some level of mentorship. I kind of don't take anyone as like the perfect role model. I just look at people and I try to assess, hey, what are they uniquely strength, what are the unique strengths, what the unique experiences, and like what are also is like maybe some of their weaknesses, right? And I try to pull just the strengths, right? As you take any, take any kind of celebrity mentor, right? They're a mixed bag, right? They got some good stuff and bad stuff, right? So you got to kind of pull the right stuff. And my advice for getting advice is that when you talk to people, everyone will have advice for you, and they'll tell you, "Hey, here's what I did." I think the really helpful thing in kind of like listening to advice is making sure that the whoever your mentor is, they're going to give you advice about their environment, right? Hey, this worked for me, when I was at this company. I think it's really important to ask, what are the conditions of that environment that enable that advice to be successful? So what I found is a lot of times people give advice, but they don't really understand if their world is similar to your world. And so the advice doesn't always copy paste, right? But sometimes it does, right? If it's like, hey, I was struggling with this thing and here's kind of how I was thinking, and here's the environment I was in. If that's the environment you're in now, it's probably really good advice. If it's way different, you just got to take it with a grain of salt. So I think it's always listen, always consider people's input, but you got to also use your own judgment and kind of discrimination to figure out like what should apply to me, at what time. And just remember, everyone's flawed, but there's things we can learn from everyone. So that's kind of like my personal strategy for kind of consuming advice. And I would say any success I've had doesn't come from any raw talent I have. It's more from like just being, thoughtful and shrewd about listening to, seeking a lot of advice and being thoughtful and shrewd about consuming that.
Cool. And say that question again? That was a great question for when you're asking about the
I would say
advice.
like, what were the conditions of environment that allowed that advice to be, that made that advice work or that approach work? Right. I think you should understand like, what was the environment like, and is it similar to what I'm in? If so, just a silly example be, I could ask, CEO of a Fortune 500 company, hey, how did you drive business growth next year? How did you organize your calendar time? But if I'm in a 10-person company, like obviously like that may work for that person in that role. It has no relevance to me. And it's probably by default bad advice for me because I'm not a Fortune 100 CEO. That one's obvious, right? But sometimes we forget, when we talk to people we respect, it's hard to know kind of like if what they're suggesting is applicable in kind of like the stage and environment we're in. So I think it's just good to like always consider like, where is advice coming from? What are the conditions that made it appropriate or successful? And just, I guess said more simply, like, take everything with a grain of salt.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, that's great advice. So we're gonna do really quickly because we're almost out of time, but just a quick lightning round. So just a quick questions for you. Just first thing that comes to mind. So is there any one book or podcast that you would recommend often to others? And it can be about
Besides
anything.
his own
Security.
podcast.
Yeah, it doesn't have to be security. Just something you enjoy that you like to recommend to others. Book or podcast.
So I'll give so I read a lot of science fiction books, right? And the specific book I'll recommend is called House of Suns by I forget his last name. His last name is Reynolds. His first name starts with an A, but House of Suns. And I like this author is an astrophysicist, and it's kind of a hard sci-fi. I like kind of reading about the future because it helps me envision what's possible. I think sometimes we get kind of stuck in the present, and like any crazy idea about future technology, some science fiction author already wrote it, right? The technology wasn't quite there yet for that to apply to our world. We're in this very unique window of time where the technology is almost there, right? And so it's good to remind ourselves kind of what's possible and to kind of dream about the future and be optimistic, ambitious to actually achieve those things versus kind of being too rooted in the past and the present, which is kind of how our human brains work. So I like that particular book for some reasons, but I love sci-fi.
Very cool.
I like that. And then what's one mistake that taught you a lot in your just overall career?
How much time do we have left? Because I got a lot of mistakes.
It's just the first one that comes to mind.
I think the biggest mistake I made was, a lot of people look at my career, they're like, I want to copy your career. I'm like, don't copy my career. I spent like 10 years, right? You could do my 20-year career in half the time. I think the biggest mistake I made early in my career is getting too proud of being able to teach myself things, right? I taught myself to program, I taught myself to start a business, I taught myself how to build a web page, right? There's some ego there, right? And it's way cheaper and easier and faster to just learn from other people. And that took me like probably 15 years of my career to really, and I was so good at teaching myself things, I kind of like ignored that. And I think once I kind of, got the humility to ask the questions and learn from others, I think I probably had more career growth in the last 10 years, or sorry, the last 5 years than the first 15 years. So just drop the ego and just like see what you learn from other people. I think you'll be surprised.
That's great. Did it happen naturally because you're like, okay, I just gotta, like, how did you come to the point where you're like, okay, I don't know, I can't learn everything. I gotta ask for help sometimes.
So it's kind of it's a bit of an embarrassing story, but my startup was acquired by this other company, and kind of my mentor there, like I was working on my product, and the mentor came to me and said like, hey, you're working on your thing, but it's like, we got like 20% of our company now working on like 2% of our revenue. It's kind of a waste, right? And I was like, screw you, man. Like, why'd you even buy this company, right? And the guy was great because he just gave me, he's like, Evan, you got a huge ass ego, man. You're so focused on proving why your thing was successful, right? You're not thinking about, how you can help the bigger company, and you're not even trying to listen or learn from anyone else. And I was like, F you, man. And then like, for some reason, like a week later, it just kind of soaked in. I was like, damn, he's kind of right. And then I spent the next 3 months and, hey, I'm here anyway. They bought my company. Let me just try to learn from these people. They're obviously smart. And I think in those 3 months, I learned more, from, 2 or 3 guys at this company than I had learned in like 3 years of starting my own company by myself. And like, that was like such a like kind of a wake up call for me where it's like, and I just remember like, 3 or 6 months after that, I was like, I've wasted my life. Like, what am I doing? Right. So that was it's a bit embarrassing because I was a higher ego person back then. I hope I've rotated the other direction, but that was a really big wake up call. And I think that conversation certainly set my life and career on a different trajectory.
Very cool.
Last one. If you were not in the position you are now in cybersecurity with Abnormal, where would you be, or where would you like to be?
I have a lot of personal interest for, how AI is going to change kind of how we work and how we live. And so I just can't imagine anything outside of AI. I think it's the most consequential technology in civilization. We're at the most interesting time in the, again, in the history of humanity. AI may be the last big invention, right, we have as a civilization. So I don't know exactly what, but I would kind of be something in AI, right? And maybe thinking about how do we safely or securely use AI, or how do we make it easier for AI to be applied in more thoughtful ways. A lot of AI applications today are kind of like you're building like horseless carriages, where you took like a horse-drawn carriage and kind of swapped out the horse for the engine, right? We're kind of bolting on AI to kind of the old world. I think there's an opportunity for us to really reimagine, reinvent how things should work in the AI native world. And I think the way that the nature of software, the nature of computers, or how we live our lives is going to fundamentally change. And so something in that category, right? I haven't really thought about it, but that's where I have a lot of passion for. Or I'd make some video games, which would be fun.
I was going to say, I thought you were going to say video games. I was like,
maybe when I retire.
Yeah. Last question on then. What's your favorite video game? Or is there a favorite one right now? Are you able to play? Or was there a favorite one that was like, this is why I want to go into video games?
So, I mean, I've played like all the video games. The last 10 years, I probably played less than I wanted to. The one game, so I really only play one game, which is Path of Exile, which is a very complex game, which I love.
Okay.
Anything that's like requires spreadsheets and Python scripts to win, like that's my game. So that's what I love.
I haven't heard of this game. Okay. I used to play a lot, but now, busy. I've got a family, but I do try to play occasionally. So very cool.
I'm like basically like a part-time professional Path of Exile player.
I gotta look this up.
Path of Exile. I gotta look it up.
Yep. Well, Evan, this has been great, man. Really thank you for coming on. Lots of really cool topics that we covered, and thanks for sharing your history, your lessons learned, coming through the fray, and all the things you guys got going on now and for the future. So I think this was a really good episode. So thank you again.
John, great to see you guys. Thank you for having me, and let's do it again soon.
Absolutely. All right. With that, we're out.